All right, if you would, open up to Acts chapter 8. Acts chapter 8. If you look down at verse 25, here in Acts chapter 8, we kind of pivot off of one story and move to another. You've already studied through about Simon the sorcerer and seen his change toward the Lord to really be converted, and yet still be affected by his past and not to truly recognize the old self that needs to be shed. And so even appealing to the apostles to say, just give me this ability. How much does it cost? I'll give it to you. And if you don't know, this is how the magic world works even to this day. They come up with tricks. You can go in and you can buy them, and they'll tell you the secrets, and then you go on your merry way. So this is an age-old habit. But then to see Peter come right before him and tell him, look, this has got to change. You stand guilty before God in the gall of bitterness. And then to see now we move away, and of course Simon says, will you pray for me? Of course, the prayer of a righteous avails much, has a big difference change. Then you get to verse 25. He says, and when they had solemnly testified and spoken the word of the Lord, they started back to Jerusalem and were preaching the gospel to many villages of the Samaritans. So they leave this place of Samaria. Well, make sure I got the right town here. So here's where Philip was, back in Samaria, the city, Sebaste. And so now here Peter and John are going back to Jerusalem because that's where the apostles are kind of nailed down at, in one sense. That's where they're kind of home based out of. And so as they go back, now Peter and John are going through and preaching to the Samaritans. Now, I want you to kind of put this in context in some other stories that you know. Do you remember the story where Jesus was headed to Jerusalem with his apostles? And they came through the region of Samaria, and there were some people who said, we're not going to let you stay in our town because you're headed to Jerusalem. If you remember, John come to Jesus, this is in the gospel accounts, and they say to Jesus, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy these people? Ooh. And then Jesus turns and says, you don't know what kind of spirit you're of. No way. Now, look at where, that's James and John. Who we're talking about here is Peter and John. Have you seen a vast change in John? Now, here they are going through these Samaritan villages, and they're preaching Jesus, and they're on their way back to Jerusalem. So they would be rejected the same way like they were with Jesus, but look at what's changed. You tell me, what changed within John? His heart. That's what's changed. Now, we just came off of a story about Simon, who after he came into Christ, all of his sins are forgiven, but he still needed to change, right? Whenever we came into Jesus, that's just the beginning of change. We now have a saved relationship because our sins have been washed away after we've been baptized into Christ. And now we go, I got to continue to make sure I'm not doing things according to the old way, that I'm doing things according to Christ. So you see in Simon, here's a guy who needed to be refined, and he hadn't quite got there yet, but he was with the Lord before. Now you get this little quick illustration, if you think back through the previous stories in John's life, of going, here's John, and this is what change looks like. We have another fancy word for it. Sanctification. It's the process of refinement in what is holy. Now, gaining in character, gaining. So you might not, it doesn't jump off the page at you. You just see, okay, so Peter and John are going through the villages of Samaria and they're headed for Jerusalem and they're preaching Jesus. That doesn't really jump off at you, does it? Until you think back on the stories before about John and his brother James. Then you see, look at the difference. To realize this, when people see us striving to live according to Christ, they don't know the past. Most people don't know the things that we came from, the stupidity that we used to have, the ignorance that we used to have, and go, oh, they've changed. Look at the difference. All they see is, oh, wow, I can't believe, look at what they do. Look at how they've done that. And who do they want to give credit to? You. Who do we point them to? Our God, Christ. So, when you see this statement in verse 25, when they had solemnly testified, there's Peter and John, and spoke the word of the Lord, they started back to Jerusalem and were preaching the gospel to many villages of the Samaritans. Here they are, preaching and teaching. Then, verse 26, now we're going to change characters. Now we're going to go to Philip. Now, what do you know about Philip? One of the 7. What do you know about his character? Wise, full of wisdom, full of the Spirit, very caring, good reputation, right? So you think about those words that were used to describe the 7 men back there in Acts chapter 6, and you go, so you already know a little bit about Philip. You already know, full of wisdom, good reputation, full of Spirit. You go, this is the terminology that's talked about. These are the descriptors. And I want you to think for just a moment. Can you imagine if someone said, hey, do you know, and then insert your name? Can you imagine if they said, oh, I know them. They have a great reputation, they're full of the Spirit, and they're full of wisdom. Would you be disappointed? Or would you be like, they said that about me? They should start telling the truth, you know. But you start to realize these things aren't just words. I mean, that's what people were saying about them. And of course, one of them is Philip. So, just to let you know what's going on here. So, we get to verse 26. It says, because keep in mind, Philip was the one who was preaching in Samaria, the city of Sebaste, to start. And so all 3 of them are making their way back to Jerusalem. Peter, John, Philip. It tells you what Peter and John are doing in verse 25. Verse 26, what's the first word of the verse? But. Guess who's not going back to Jerusalem just yet? Philip. But an angel of the Lord spoke to Philip, saying, get up and go south to the road that descends from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a desert road. Now, he says, now look, Peter and John are going back to Jerusalem, but not you. And I want you to keep in mind, what does the term angel literally mean? Messenger. So, what is this angel doing? Giving God's message, God's direction, specifically to Philip. Well, how do you receive things when you find out what God wants? I just want you to see an attitude. There's a reason he's full of wisdom. There's a reason he's full of good, he's got a good reputation. There's a reason he's full of the Spirit. Because who is he ever presently attentive to? God. And what God wants. Sometimes we get into situations and we've been hurt or we've been wronged, and God says, hey, I mean, think about Ephesians 4:32. Be kind, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. And we go, I don't want to be kind to them. I'm not tender-hearted, I'm more calloused-hearted. And I'm certainly not going to forgive them for what they did. Is that wise? Is that going to lead to a good reputation before God? Is that spiritual? See, how we listen shows where we're at with God. Here's Philip. He says, you know what? You're with Peter and John. That seems like pretty good company. I don't know about you. I think I'd enjoy that. And then to be told, Now they're going to keep going, I want you to go down to a deserted place, and here's my direction. Susan. I don't even have an answer for that one. Is it? Listen and be attentive. It's so different for them. For us, if you remember back at the end of Acts chapter 6, we're talking about Peter being before the council, and it says, and his face became like one of an angel. And for us now, that's kind of a head scratcher of going, that's a great detail, but that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know what an angel looks like. I've never seen one face to face. And to go, so his face looks like an angel could be just the same as saying, and his face looked like some old name that you've heard before, like Abraham. Okay, I don't know what Abraham looked like either. So for them, they had some familiarity, something beyond what our limited knowledge is on that. So there was something about this that was very convicting for Philip. So here's this angel, this messenger of the Lord, and comes speaks to Philip, says, get up and go south to the road that descends from Jerusalem to Gaza. Think about Jerusalem, we're talking about height, and goes down to Gaza, working away kind of southwest of Jerusalem. And he says, and I know it's a deserted road. I mean, would that hit you kind of odd? I got a special mission I want you to go on, and I'd like you to go out to a place that is deserted. Does that make a lot of sense? It doesn't until you read the rest of the story. Then it makes all the sense in the world, right? Does that ever happen with us where we see what God wants us to do and we go, that doesn't make any sense? And then we turn away from it and we pay the price for it. As opposed to we hear what's said from the Lord and go, man, that doesn't make sense, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I honor God and not myself. So realize, Philip's going through these same kind of thought processes, and what's his answer? Well, let's see. I know you know the rest of the story anyway, but we'll just act like you didn't. So, verse 27. So he got up and went. What does that tell you? He followed. He listened. He was attentive. He says, if that's what you want, go down to some deserted place that goes down to Gaza. And the Gaza Strip is kind of that section right along the Mediterranean Sea, heading along the coastline. But he says, if that's where you want me to be, that's where I'll go. And you realize, and then here's what happens. You think God gives direction for no point? Do you ever think about Jesus' commands? You go, does he just give them because he wants us to have something to do? Just like being in a class where a teacher says, we got to fill 20 minutes, and I know these kids will get rowdy if I don't give them something to do, so I'm going to give them some busy work. Is that what God does with us? Every command, every saying has a purpose and a point. And it's all to lead us into Christ-like behavior. If you want a verse for that, then you can read Romans 8:28. Because that's exactly what that's about. Because the next verse talks about justification and sanctification. And you go, oh, you mean that's the point of this life? Sure is. Then, so here in 27. So he got up and went, and there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasury, and he had come to Jerusalem to worship. I'm trying to think. Does anybody have a King James Version? New King James? King James. Will you read out loud verse 27 for us? That's it. I don't know if you picked up on it in listening to it. If you notice, it says, he arose and went, and behold. It throws it in the King James Version. It doesn't include that idea in other translations. But the idea is, so he followed God, and he did what God said. He went up and he went, and lo and behold, this is what happens. It's like you'll never guess who I ran into today. You ever say that to people? So this is kind of the mindset. He says, so he got up and went, and there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of Candace. Now, this is just a question to help you to see the contrast here. Here's a Jew. What do you know about Ethiopians? How do you typically picture an Ethiopian in your mind? African, what was that? Not a Jew, that's for sure. And you go, skin color, usually pretty dark complected. And you go, could there be? I mean, typically when you think about Jews, do you think about eunuchs? You start to kind of notice, even if you read back through Deuteronomy 23, we're not going to go back and look at it, but if you want to make a note, Deuteronomy 23, verses like 1 and 2, eunuchs were not welcome in the assembly. They were not going to be part of God's people under Old Covenant. Now, what's unique about this? Why did he go to Jerusalem? To worship. Here's a guy who's an Ethiopian, and if you can think about the geography of Africa, Ethiopia is on the horn of Africa, if you know where that is. It would be basically south of Egypt and a little ways even to the east from there in that little horn. So when you're talking about the distance traveled, I mean, you're not talking about hundreds of miles. I mean, you're talking about more than 1,000 miles to travel. And when you think about him traveling, I know you see, here he is, and he's traveling along, and he's Ethiopian, he's a eunuch, and he's a eunuch because who's he around? The queen, which tells you, I mean, he's right there with her, and they want to make sure that there's not some illegitimate child. That's why he's a eunuch. And then to go, and she's the queen of the Ethiopians. Then it says, and just so happens, he is in charge of all her treasury. All of it. Now, you're going to see here in a minute that that's a big deal. Then, as this continues, he says, and he had come to Jerusalem to worship. His whole purpose in coming was to worship. It was not an ambassadorship of going, you know what, we need to make friends with those that are up in Palestine or Canaan or the Promised Land. He says, he came to worship. This is his purpose. Now, that should be a little unique to us. Whenever we come to worship, is that really our only point? Or is it, well, you know, I'm going to get to see some people that I really enjoy. Here's an outsider, and his purpose in coming to Jerusalem was to worship. Just so happened, he's head over all of this Egyptian queen's treasury. Yes. Doesn't mention her in the story, other than just telling you his position compared to her. Deborah. According to Deuteronomy, he would not be allowed. So let's see the whole picture. All right, I'm going to show it to you. I thought we didn't need. Look back at Deuteronomy 23. I think you're going to see why I didn't really want to read this, but we need the last phrase. Deuteronomy 23, verse 1. I'll read it and try not to blush. It says, no one who is emasculated or has his male organ cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. Now, what I want to see here is, notice, not allowed in the assembly of the Lord. So could you gather at the temple to worship? Now, realize this, in Deuteronomy, you're before the temple. This is in the days of the tabernacle. So if you were a eunuch, you would not be allowed to come into the tabernacle to offer sacrifices. So in turn, whenever things turn from tabernacle to the temple, permanent structure, same thing would be there. Well, he would not be allowed in the assembly of the Lord. Certainly. And especially when you think in terms of there aren't a whole lot of saints left in Jerusalem. They all got scattered at the beginning of chapter 8, except for the apostles are still there. And maybe there were a few others, but it's not a very large contingency. So here this man comes, and his whole purpose was to go to Jerusalem and worship. What would you imagine happened? You would certainly assume that, wouldn't you? They know, I mean, look at the way he's introduced here. To go, well, this was common practice among those males that were around queens. This is not something that they would consider outlandish. We would consider it outlandish, and so here he travels all this way to worship in Jerusalem, and then to be told, you're not welcome here. What would your heart be like if you had set your mind to travel a long distance to worship the Lord in the only place that you knew where His temple was, and then after all that difficulty and trouble and sacrifice, you were turned away? Would it be heartbreaking? I mean, would you be just rejected and dejected? Now, Judy. They're definitely not. In terms of, it's not as if there were all these copies of the Old Covenant roaming around, especially in other countries. So here they were, and to go, nothing like showing up. I won't use that illustration, that's not fitting. But to think through the idea of going to come this far, just because you've heard about the God of Israel. Keep in mind, it had been 1,400 years since Moses and the Israelites crossed over the Red Sea on dry ground. Those are the kind of things that leave a lasting impression. I don't know if that's what he had heard, but you see the heart within him to want to worship. Now, you imagine, here he is on the road back, and he's traveling down this deserted road. There's nobody else around. I'm going to make the assumption that he was rejected when he got to Jerusalem to be able to worship at the temple. If they knew he was a eunuch, they certainly would not allow that. And to think all this was for nothing. All this was for naught. Notice what happens. Verse 28. And he was returning and sitting in his chariot and was reading the prophet Isaiah. Now here he is. Now here's kind of a little bit of Judy's question. Would he have known? Now there's nothing in Isaiah about prohibiting eunuchs to be in the worship assembly until you get to a certain part in Isaiah. And so here things are together, and I know right now, in the days we live in, you can go to the Dollar Tree and you can buy a copy of the Old Testament and the New Testament for $1, and now because of inflation, 25 cents. Now, that is today. I mean, which tells you there's no excuse for us to think, I can't afford a Bible. Understanding it is a completely different idea. But to have one. For them, anybody know off the top of their head how many chapters are in Isaiah? There's a bunch. I like the educated answer. 66 is the correct answer. Now, a scribe was paid a day's wage to copy this much scripture in Hebrew. That's a day's wage. Now, the scribe's job was to write that much, let alone, he also had to prepare the vellum or the parchment that it was written on. He also had to prepare the writing utensils and the ink, and to have an original to copy. Now, how many of these do you think it takes to copy the book of Isaiah? Any guesses? A bunch. That's right, a bunch. So, having a copy of Isaiah to take to another country, you would have to have a truckload of money to buy it. And if you put it in present-day terminology, looking at values of things, it's like $1 million to have a copy of Isaiah. So is it cheap to have your own copy of things? Now, here's the beautiful part of this. You want to know what Old Testament prophet, other than Moses and the Psalms, perhaps, you want to know what Old Testament prophet speaks the most about the Christ? Wow, good guess. Isaiah. Now, do you see how the Lord brings these things together? Now, here's a man who's probably been rejected in Jerusalem, and after coming all that way, and yet either he possessed it or he paid for it, which I'm assuming he paid for it because it brings out the money aspect of things, to buy his own copy of Isaiah. And as he's traveling home on a chariot, and whatever you do, don't think of these chariots like the old Ben-Hur movie, or these chariots are going like this to get home. The idea is they're just traveling along. Don't think that this is a race. And so here he's going, been rejected in Jerusalem, and yet what is he doing? He's reading Isaiah. What does that tell you about his heart? He didn't give up because he had been rejected by somebody. Even a God that he cared so much about, to be able to go up and worship and even probably be rejected. Now, as this continues, here's the situation, and you kind of notice why it said in the King James, behold. Look at what's going on. Then, verse 29. Then the Spirit said to Philip, now I want you to notice, back up in verse 26, it was an angel, but now we're dealing with the Spirit. Anybody want to guess what the Spirit is? The Holy Spirit. Now, isn't that something? Nothing like having an up-close and personal interaction with the Holy Spirit to give you direction. Now, he says, then the Spirit said to Philip, go up and join this chariot. Now, he says, just go up and join him. Now, here he comes down. It's supposed to be a deserted road. Like, I don't know what I'm doing down here, but I'm here. And then all of a sudden to see this chariot traveling along this road. And if it's deserted and it's dusty, you go, man, you can almost see the plume of dust coming off the back. But it was going slower or a little bit quicker. So, go up and join this chariot. Verse 30. Once again, look at Philip's heart. Philip ran up and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet. Now, just stop there for a second. Spirit says, go join up with that chariot. Philip goes, okay. And then what does he do? He's running to catch up with this thing. And you imagine going, well, this doesn't sound easy. What do you mean go join up with that? Do we ever hear what the Spirit of God's saying through the Word of God and go, that's not easy? And your point is, where's your heart in this? Philip hears the instruction, and he doesn't go, well, I don't know, Spirit, he's got a pretty good lead on me. I don't know if I can catch up with him. He runs. He says, and as he's running, what does Philip hear? He's reading Isaiah out loud. Whoa! No wonder the angel sent me down here by the Lord to this deserted place. No wonder the Spirit was telling me to join up to this chariot. Aha! You ever have eureka moments in obedience to God? Whenever you have forgiven somebody who wronged you, somebody else was wrong the exact same way, they took the bitter path and walked away from the Lord, and then years later, you see where they are spiritually, and you go, I am so thankful I chose to honor God. Even though it was hard and difficult and came with a lot of sacrifice, that was a great choice. And you get encouragement, don't you? Judy, is that a hand up or a half? Is that a scratch? What is? Right. Do you remember in John chapter 4 when Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman at the well? And if you remember, as part of that conversation, Jesus makes a statement to her, who just so happens to be a Samaritan, and look at where we are here. God seeks true worshipers. God's the one who seeks them. Whenever we walk by the Spirit, He's going to allow, because I think all of us could probably share a similar story here about there was a person who showed us Christ. Could have been a parent, could have been a friend, could have been, I heard a story just the other day about a guy down in Oklahoma who he just drove through the McDonald's drive-thru, and there was a guy that worked there, and he's the one that led him to Christ. And now there's a guy who works the drive-thru and sees how many people a day? And they go, yet here's what the Lord does. You realize God seeks true worshipers. This is a seeking that is very specific. This is an angel told him to go to this place. Spirit tells him to go join up to this chariot. And to go, for us, we go, God, we just show me the opportunities. And whenever you get one, to seize it according to Christ. To make sure that Christ is the one who's glorified. And to go, here's where these things come together. I can't fully explain, like, this person that touches this person and that person, but I do know God seeks true worshipers. And He uses His people to do it. In the same way that He used the apostles to start this, even after He ascended to the right hand of God. Deborah. Right, having that courage to do that and to pray for those things, and to even pray in terms of the spiritual side of going, help me to be able to be helpful. And maybe there are times where you go, I don't know a whole lot, and realize whenever you get rejected, they're not really rejecting us. Who are they rejecting? As long as we walk according to Christ, they're rejecting Christ. If we do things our own way, then sometimes we heap it on ourselves. But you look through these things together, and you go, realize, am I thinking about these situations spiritually? And maybe don't think of it in terms of looking at, I want to help 100 people come to. Maybe you pray something, this is something I pray a lot, just, just let me help one more. Just one more. And not to think in terms of evangelizing the world, but to think in terms of just one more person. And then when another person comes to the Lord, one more. Maybe just one more. For you. Hold on. Judy beat you. You got to wait, Rita. Judy? You think about in those situations of going, here you and your husband are talking about spiritual things, somebody else overhears, and they go, where do you go to church? And you tell them, and you go, kind of like in 1 Corinthians, where it talks about, one person plants, one person waters, and it's God that causes the increase. All you can do is put things in front of people. They have to make those decisions. Read it.
And the heart on that dedicated time. Someday it may happen. Like in my years before, and felt that.
But she did. Right. And being able to kind of decide those things, sometimes we put all the pressure on ourselves. And to realize in the parable of the soils, it's not the seed problem. What's the problem? The heart, the soils. And so you look at that, and sometimes we know that everyone we encounter, we would just be overjoyed if they came to Christ. But we all have to understand, man, I can't make them. And if I have to make them, then it's of no value to them. And so you keep on waiting for those opportunities, and you seize them when they come. And right. And so you look at those things that come and go with our family. And so whenever the opportunity comes, don't back up the dump truck load and heap everything on. Just one thing at a time. And then, because you want to put them in a spot where they go, you know what, I want to worship God. And it has to be their decision, kind of like with Judy's, aspect. You go, that's got to be on their decision. Juanita.
Started up, and all of us. You know what? We need to. What? We need to go back. Well, we did at Amen. He's sitting there watching the kitchen. Quick. And he was looking at his watch. Said if we hadn't turned out the bakery, there was like 80 big semi trucks and cars, 30 people had been killed, and he said we would have been right
You think about the way that God protects us. I mean, if you've ever gone on a long trip and you get a big traffic jam stuck somewhere in rural America because of some big car accident, I hope you are never disappointed, because we should probably be thinking, I'm glad everything didn't go according to plan for me to be fast today, because I would have been in that accident. And learning to be patient is like, I don't think anybody likes delays, but appreciate the delays. They may really be more of a protection. They had something better. If you remember the gift of the Spirit that was going to be given to them, to where they would be able to remember all things that Jesus taught them and lead them into all truth, you go, that's better. Not only to be able to read it, but to have it stick. I don't know about you, but I got a bucket, and I got a little bucket of knowledge, and it's got a pretty good hole in the bottom, and it just likes to filter out. Deborah? And how did that go? It didn't go well. That's right. Sure. Right. And you think through the idea where it talks about, even in Ephesians, about speaking the truth in love, and you go, they don't teach calculus to kindergartners for a reason. And sometimes we approach new Christians with all this complex stuff about things that we're just figuring out, even though we've been in Christ for several years, and you go, that's not helpful. It's not helpful to them. And to go, you know what? Bible's right, Bible's right. Yeah, it is. But if you start using it as a hammer rather than as a surgeon's tool, then you're going to kill people. And we can really turn people off forever. And so we've got to be real careful on making sure that what we share with love. Pam? Right. You look at those situations that come up, and those are those things that I wonder someday, whenever we stand before God, if He would reveal to us how many millions of times He spared us from things. We may think we have it difficult, and at the same time, what if I do get in a car accident and I can't walk anymore? What does that affect in terms of my soul? I've still got to make spiritual decisions, and to not let the physical things reign over the spiritual side of things. So you see that. Reed, did you have something else here? Right. And the promise that's there in Hebrews 1. I mean, he says, don't you know that they are all, talking about angels, they're all spiritual servants sent to protect those who are going to inherit salvation. I mean, that is what is in place. And what you talk about in chapter 13 about, some people entertain, people not even knowing what's going on, and to go, look at what he's trying to do. Sometimes you have people that you have no relationship with in some odd way give you some statement or some advice, not advice, but They're just talking, and you go, huh. And it's just at the right time, right moment, and you realize, who's in control? No, it's not you, Karen. It's God that's in control. I had to. Karen, do you have a statement?
Don't roll down the window. I just stay in here. Cool. And I pray that God keeps walking. We're on the interstate. That if the sun could pull a gun on me too. You know, I mean.
Isn't it amazing how the mind works? I'm praying to God, will you take care of this? What if somebody comes and, what am I saying? God, I know you've got me taken care of. I know what happens. I'm just. Don't let them be too rough.
In the car, right on the con. And Christian. But he also,
And saw you and turned around?
No.
Oh.
He said,
And just to share this in terms, if you start reading through the scriptures, especially here in Acts, you're going to see from time to time God used people who are not his children for the benefit of his children. So, sometimes we see people and they may proclaim, hey, and you go, I don't know. But you realize God uses people, whoever he wants to use. Read back through Proverbs, it talks about God holds the hearts of kings in his hand like water, because he turns them however he wants. And you realize that's how much control God has. To be able to just go, you know what, I want their heart to go this way. And to see that aspect, and you go, wow, how come we don't recognize a God who can do that? To understand that we're going to be fine. Now, all right, time's already gone. And hopefully next week we'll actually get to figure out what Philip said to this guy when he first introduces him in verse 30. All right, well, have a good week.